3,000 more jobs are going at Lloyds, on top of 9,000 job cuts already announced. The High Street Bank is also to close 200 more branches. Shares in Lloyds Banking Group have fallen since the news. We'll be asking what the cuts mean for the bank's many customers. Also this lunchtime, Britain's first new nuclear plant for decades, Hinkley Point, is set to get final approval later today. Scotland's controversial child safety scheme is blocked by the Supreme Court. A helping hand and a heartfelt plea. President Obama implores voters to back Hillary Clinton at the polls in November. And Pope Francis suffers a heavy fall as hundreds of thousands gather for an open-air mass in Poland.
And in the south, the campaign for answers. Why did some health experts get a cash bonus for treating Ebola when others didn't? And campaigners in Reading want the authorities to officially declare that it welcomes refugees to the town.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the BBC News at 1. Lloyds Bank is cutting another 3,000 jobs and will close 200 branches by the end of the year. It's warning that uncertainty after the Brexit vote could affect its profits in the future and that the cuts are partly due to changes in how people do their banking. Lloyds is still partly state-owned and is already in the middle of cutting 9,000 posts, as Simon Gompertz now tells us.
Even there.
I'm so sorry, we are having a bit of trouble with that piece there. We'll see if we can go back to that in just a moment. I'm being told that we probably can.
Across Britain, bank branches are disappearing. Within weeks, it's hard to tell they were even there, like this former Lloyds near Cardiff.
A lot of people just sort of mesmerised at why it's done and how they're going to get their money.
It is, you know, a bit of a nuisance. Like, it does sort of change your system of doing things, really.
A lot of the branches around here have been closed, not just Lloyds, other banks as well, and a lot of people are finding it difficult to do any of their banking.
Lloyds is already in the process of closing 200 branches, with another 200 now going with their staff before the end of next year. That'll leave the group with 1,850 in total. At the same time, the Brexit vote could be speeding up the drive to cut jobs.
Lloyds says it's us, the customers, who are behind the branch closures because we're using our mobiles, for instance, much more to do our banking. As for the job cuts, it doesn't directly blame those on Brexit, but it does explain how low interest rates make it harder to turn in a profit, and the uncertainty around Brexit means that interest rates are likely to be lower for longer.
Lloyds has said there might be less confidence in the economy, less demand for money. That might mean lower interest rates as well, and that would mean lower profits for Lloyds going forward, so they've raised a point of caution.
Lloyds was getting rid of 9,000 posts anyway. Now a further 3,000 will go by the end of next year. All of this while the march of the mobile, banking on the move, is upsetting the economics of high street players with multiple branches.
But as consumers, we seem to expect the banks to keep the branches open, as well as develop new internet banking technology as well. For us, it just doesn't seem that those two things are possible in this new economic environment.
But in the many communities losing their banks, where customers are being forced to queue at the post office if they have one to move money around, the closures are leaving some with a struggle to get their banking done.
Well, Simon's with me, and just on that point, Simon, what are these cuts likely to mean for customers?
Well, hundreds of branches being closed, and of course people will be worried that this will prompt other banks to do something similar because they're all under pressure at the moment. How they'll choose those branches, we don't know yet. The geographical spread, they probably haven't even decided, or whether between Lloyds, Halifax Bank of Scotland, those different brands within the group. But you know what's happening. We are using those branches less. Lloyds themselves say that transactions within the branches are down 15% so far this year alone, because we're doing it on the internet and on our mobiles. But you know, there are still, on average in the UK, 71 people who visit a branch of whatever bank each day. That's down from over 100 5 years ago, but it's still that many people who are using the branches who are going to be very disappointed if they close. And that's what's going to happen over the next year or so. We're going to see multiple closures, and a lot of communities disappointed. They just don't have that resource there. They're told they can go to the post office, but often, as I said, they end up in a queue there and they can't do all the transactions that they want.
OK, Simon, thank you. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel has said refugees who've carried out attacks in Germany mock the country that took them in. But in a speech a short time ago, she said Germany stood decisively against those who see hatred and fear between cultures and religions. Well, let's speak now to our correspondent in Berlin, Damien McGuinness. Damien, a strongly worded speech there. What signal was Mrs Merkel sending to her critics?
Well, I think the main point we can take from this, Rita, is that, in fact, Berlin is not going to change its stance on taking in refugees fleeing war and conflict zones. What she said was the point of these recent attacks we've seen over the past week from some asylum seekers here in Germany has been actually to destroy the openness of Germany, and the willingness to help is how she put it. And she said, actually, she's not going to let that happen. She said it's very important that Germany sticks to its values, and for her, this is a humanitarian question. So she was very forthright about that Germany is still going to carry on taking in refugees from war zones. We also have to remember, though, Rita, that in fact the critics that have been criticising Mrs Merkel's refugee policy here in Germany is not really the people in the mainstream political debate. On the one hand, we have the new anti-migrant party, the AfD. They've been criticising Mrs Merkel, but they're by no means in the mainstream. They probably take up, looking at recent elections, it's probably about 10 to 15% of voters might vote for them. And the other side is some political allies within Mrs Merkel's party. The political and media mainstream still backs Mrs Merkel, so she's not looking as weak as you might think, given those recent attacks we've seen here in Germany.
Damien, thank you very much. French police have used DNA tests to formally identify the second of the two attackers who killed an elderly priest in Rouen on Tuesday. He's Abdelmalik Petitjean, who was 19 and from eastern France. His identity card was found in the house of the other attacker, named earlier as Adel Kermiche. Britain's first new power plant for decades is expected to get final approval later today. The French energy firm EDF will make its final decision on the Hinkley Point project at a meeting in Paris. When it's finished, the power station will provide 7% of the UK's demand for power. From Hinkley, here's our industry correspondent, John Moylan.
It's a project on a vast scale. The twin nuclear reactors planned for Hinkley Point will be amongst the biggest anywhere in the world. Needed to replace ageing plants that are due to close down, EDF says that Hinkley C will be generating power by 2025.
Well, Britain desperately needs to have new power generation, and we need new nuclear power generation, and Hinkley is the first of a wave of projects, and we need to get on and get this power built, because we're going to struggle to keep the lights on if we don't have new nuclear capacity in the future.
They've been preparing the site for years. More than £2 billion has been ploughed into the project. But EDF will have to find billions more. Hinkley Point C will cost £18 billion. It will be the most expensive power plant in the world. It will provide 7% of the UK's electricity. Over the next decade, the project will create 25,000 jobs, providing a huge economic boost for the region. But some doubt if it will work. EDF's Flamanville project in northern France is 3 times over budget and years behind schedule. The company is also mired in debt and faces huge financial commitments in the future to upgrade its nuclear plants. Earlier this year, EDF's finance chief Thomas Piquemal resigned amid concerns soaring costs could destabilise the company. The powerful French unions want Hinkley to be delayed too. Others say Britain should be backing renewable technology, and that the vast subsidies consumers will pay for Hinkley could be better spent.
It will actually both slow down and make much more expensive the pace at which we can decarbonise our economy and therefore avoid the dangers of climate change. There are much better things to do that we can do faster and, as I say, and cheaper.
There's concerns too about the foothold the project will give the Chinese in the UK's energy market. The Chinese nuclear industry is paying a third of the cost of Hinkley in return for a commitment to build its own reactors here in the years to come. EDF says Hinkley Point will be the biggest construction site in Europe. It could be providing power well into this century. The arguments over it will continue, but for Britain, this could be the start of a new nuclear era. John Moylan, BBC News.
A scheme to give every child in Scotland a named person to give them help and support if they need it has been blocked by the UK Supreme Court. The scheme was due to start next month, but judges have ruled that it breaches the right to privacy and a family life. Well, let's speak now to our correspondent Stephen Godden. Stephen, why did the government think this scheme was necessary and why has it been blocked by the court?
Well, the Scottish Government say it's about creating a safety net for every child in Scotland, but particularly those that are vulnerable. The idea is that a named person appointed by the state, a single point of contact, would offer advice, support or intervention if necessary. But for some people, it is a big problem. And for some of the opponents, they say that it is an intrusion into family life. Some of those opponents have taken their objections via the courts and this morning welcomed the outcome at the UK Supreme Court, who judges ruled that in principle named person was justifiable, but the way that it's been drafted, particularly around information sharing, was unlawful and that in its current form it cannot go ahead.
But 4 charitable bodies and 3 parents who are the appellants are concerned that the legislation involves the state interfering unnecessarily and excessively in family life and disrespecting the privacy of both parents and children.
Well, named person was due to come into effect at the end of next month. That cannot now happen. Instead, the Scottish Government have 42 days to come up with a timetable for making the changes that are needed to have it comply with legislation. Now, already there are demands to recall Parliament here at Holyrood so that MSPs can have their say on the changes. The Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, he says that they're already at work making those changes and that the Scottish Government remain committed to the policy of named person.
Stephen, thank you. Pope Francis has celebrated Mass in front of 500,000 people as part of World Youth Day, involving Catholics from across the world. But there was a moment of alarm when the Pope tripped and fell. The pontiff was helped quickly to his feet and he didn't appear hurt. It's the Pope's first visit to an Eastern European nation. Yesterday, he called on Poland to overcome fear and to show compassion to migrants. His intervention didn't go down well with some, as Tom Burridge now reports.
The Pope this morning at Poland's Jasna Góra Monastery, one of this staunchly Catholic nation's most sacred sites. A small fall, but not enough to deter Pope Francis on day 2 of 5 of World Youth celebrations. These are not football fans, but young Catholics. And this scene is typical of this festival. People from one country cheering the country of others.
World Youth Day has become a huge event, an opportunity for young Catholics from all over the world to come together to celebrate. But it's also a chance for Pope Francis to do what he's become known for, to tackle controversial issues head on.
Even before the Pope had arrived in Krakow, the Vatican had signalled disquiet over Poland's debate on immigration. Pope Francis then carefully chided the Polish government on its tough stance against accepting more migrants or refugees. But public opinion in Poland is largely not in tune with the Pope's way of thinking.
I more agree with the Polish government. I think we need to accept the right people. There's too many terrorists, there's too much danger, and I think the Polish government is doing a great job with that.
You cannot just be a good Christian about it and take all of them, because this is a danger and it can make a big problem for all Europe.
People are afraid of terrorism and they don't want to be live in fear.
Pilgrims who've come to Krakow adore the Pope. In Poland, surveys suggest he is popular, but the enthusiasm of religious leaders here is said to be lukewarm.
For the Polish Catholic Church, John Paul II is their national saint, hero and icon. And Pope Francis is a very different Pope from John Paul II. He's opened up certain questions of moral teaching that the Polish Catholics don't like. He's a slightly different style and manner, and for many of the Polish bishops, they find that awkward and uncomfortable.
Controversy aside, World Youth Day is about solidarity between young people from different nations. A symbol of that after recent terror attacks in Europe are the French flags. And time and again, ask people here about the issue of terrorism, and they say they will fight hate with love. Tom Burridge, BBC News, Krakow.
Time is 1:15. Our top story this lunchtime. Lloyds Bank is to cut another 3,000 jobs and close 200 branches. It's partly blaming economic uncertainty following the EU referendum. And still to come, the ups and downs of trying to save the original White Knuckle ride.
And on South Today, bring her home. The Fleet family of woman held in Iran put pressure on the new Foreign Secretary to get her released. And who lives in a house like this? Well, it could be you. We're granted rare access to a new Forest Folly that's on the market for £2 million.
President Obama has told Democrats that no one is more qualified to be the next president of the United States than Hillary Clinton. In his speech to the party's national convention, he described her as a leader with real plans to break down barriers, blast through glass ceilings and widen the circle of opportunity to every single American. And he described her Republican rival, Donald Trump, as a homegrown demagogue. From Philadelphia, Kim Katas sent this report.
On the third night of their convention, the Democrats brought out their biggest asset, a popular president and gifted speaker who made the case for Hillary Clinton as commander-in-chief.
There has never been a man or a woman, not me, not Bill, nobody, more qualified than Hillary Clinton to serve as president of the United States of America.
President Obama knows that to preserve his legacy, he needs Hillary Clinton to win the White House.
Time and again, you've picked me up. And I hope sometimes I picked you up too. And tonight, I ask you to do for Hillary Clinton what you did for me. I ask you to carry her the same way you carried me.
This was the night of all the issues at the heart of the race, from immigration to gun control. On stage, an emotional appeal from a high-profile survivor of a shooting in Arizona 5 years ago.
Speaking is difficult for me, but come January, I want to say these 2 words, Madam President.
Her rival had just stirred up a storm after allegations that Russia was behind a hack into the emails of the Democratic Party. Donald Trump suggested Russia should hack the emails of Mrs. Clinton herself.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press.
So at the Democratic convention, from the Vice President Joe Biden to Hillary Clinton's running mate Senator Tim Kaine and the president himself, they all attacked Mr. Trump.
Donald is not really a plans guy. He's not really a facts guy either. He calls himself a business guy, which is true, but I have to say I know plenty of businessmen and women who've achieved remarkable success without leaving a trail of lawsuits and unpaid workers and people feeling like they got cheated.
Every speaker on stage had one message, not just for those in the audience here, but for the millions of Americans watching on television. There is too much at stake in this race to stay home on Election Day.
And then, after President Obama laid out his vision for America, a surprise appearance by the woman he hopes will take it forward. Kim Ratas, BBC News, Philadelphia.
Let's speak to our North America correspondent Nick Bryant. And Nick, this was one of President Obama's most powerful speeches yet.
Listening to that speech, Rita, I was reminded of what John F. Kennedy once said of Sir Winston Churchill. He mobilised the English language and sent it into battle. Barack Obama does have these extraordinary rhetorical gifts, and he deployed the full arsenal last night. Some of those lines were weaponised. Now, clearly he believes that Hillary Clinton, by winning the election, will preserve his legacy. But I think he thinks the stakes are much, much higher than that. That she will also preserve America's standing in the world and America's ideals and values. And we heard that in the most pointed and controversial line of the speech. Anyone who has threatened America's values, whether they're fascists, communists, jihadists, or homegrown demagogues, will ultimately fail. We have never heard a sitting president use that kind of language, that strong language, against the presidential nominee of a rival party. And I think it speaks of a number of things. Not only the revulsion that Barack Obama feels that he would hand the keys of the White House over to Donald Trump, but a fear also that that might happen if Democrats and other people around America don't turn out and vote for Hillary Clinton.
Nick, thank you. Nick Bryant there. Now, if you're sitting at your desk having lunch rather than nipping out for a bit of exercise, you might want to rethink your work-life pattern. A major study has found that sitting in the office for at least 8 hours a day massively increases the risk of premature death. The answer is an hour a day of brisk walking or cycling. Amy Cole reports.
The daily commute. Around the world, every day, billions of us make our way to work. And for some, this will be the only exercise we get before we're chained to our desks.
So I've managed to escape the office, but some of us never even leave the office. Time to find out who takes a break at this company and who doesn't.
Inside this IT office in central London, they're busy. The research suggests that if they were to take a 5-minute break every hour or exercise at lunchtimes, they'd stave off falling into an early grave.
Ben, your colleagues have told me that you're the most sedentary. Why don't we take a walk to the printer?
Yep.
Bit of exercise for you. So how many hours do you spend at your desk a day?
Oh, I spend about 7 hours a day at my desk.
I mean, that sounds like a lot. Why don't you take a break?
Try to take a break at lunchtime, try to take an hour, just walking around, get a bit of fresh air and just relax.
But it doesn't usually happen.
Well, I try to make it happen most days, but yeah, we do it when we can.
Research published by The Lancet says that being inactive is known to increase the risk of conditions such as heart disease and cancer. It has been linked to 5.3 million deaths globally a year, compared to 5.1 million linked to smoking.
In the workplaces, we need to create opportunities for people to take breaks for example, every hour. To have a few minutes break and being physically active. And I think we need to change the mindset of people that physical activity is something that we need to build into our everyday life.
The study says sit less, move more. So if you still haven't had a break, then it might be time to lace up, get and get going. Amy Cole, BBC News.
There's been a big increase in the number of assaults on prison officers in England and Wales. Let's speak now to our Home Affairs correspondent Dominic Casciani. And Dominic, talk us through the figures.
Yeah, Rita, I mean, the prisons are there to keep us safe from the most dangerous people in society, but the government is also under a duty to make sure prisons themselves are safe for the inmates and the staff who work inside. And figures today from the Ministry of Justice for England and Wales, they make really grim reading for the new Secretary of State, Liz Truss. We've got 5,400 assaults on prison staff in the 12 months to the end of March. That's a 40% rise. It's the highest level on record. 17,000 assaults by one prisoner on another. And fewer jails are now performing well. 6 of the jails across England and Wales are said to be of serious concern. That's double the number from last year. It includes 3 of the largest, Doncaster, Liverpool and Wormwood Scrubs. And there's also been 65 prisoners released in error. Now, that's the highest total for 6 years. Now, what's been driving all this? You know, some people say it's about prison overcrowding, but the numbers are down from a record high. But a lot of the violence seems to be linked to the presence of new psychoactive substances, so-called legal highs. Each of these incidents ties up staff. It adds to the enormous pressures when staff are down from 2010. Can the new Justice Secretary get on top of this? Today, Liz Truss said that the level of violence in our prisons is unacceptable and improving safety is vital to her major reform plans, but she warns it will take time to turn a lot of prisons around into places of safety.
OK, Dominic, thank you. Her creations, characters like Peter Rabbit and Jemima Puddle Duck, have delighted generations of readers. And this year marks the 150th anniversary of the birth of Beatrix Potter. Many of her works were written in the Lake District, where the Beatrix Potter brand has now been turned into a multi-million-pound tourist industry, as Colin Patterson now reports.
Esthwaite water, this is the inspiration behind Jeremy Fisher and Jemima Puddle Duck.
They come from all round the world because of the Potter books. Not Harry, this is Beatrix Potter. Exactly 150 years after her birth, Beatrix Potter and her friends, Jemima Puddle Duck, Peter Rabbit and the like, are still a multi-million-pound industry.
Those of us who've just sort of seen the mugs and bought the tea towel don't quite realise that if you read the books, they are absolutely full of death and danger. And I think children around the world can relate to that. If there'd just been sweet stories about rabbits in blue jackets, they would have gone the way of many other books.
Each day, coachloads of Japanese tourists arrive in the Lake District to visit where she lived and wrote. Her popularity helped by Peter Rabbit being used to teach English.
Japanese like nature very much. When I read Peter Rabbit book and saw the beautiful scenery, I wanted to experience and feel same nature. I remember the time when I read the Peter Rabbit book to my son at bedtime. I felt as if I were in the book with Peter Rabbit.
One of the real thrills for fans of Beatrix Potter is that when they come here to Hilltop, they can stand in the exact locations which were used for the illustrations in the books.
And it's estimated as many as a third of the 100,000 visitors each year are from abroad.
Have you got a favourite?
Peter Rabbit.
What do you like about him?
He's naughty.
We have to visit here before we die.
It's been possible to keep this part of Cumbria as it is because of Beatrix Potter, a great conservationist. On her death in 1943, she bequeathed 4,000 acres and 14 farms to the National Trust. And there are plans to expand the power of Potter. This October, a delegation from the Lake District is travelling to China to speak to tour companies there, hoping to turn annual vacations into the Year of the Rabbit. Colin Patterson, BBC News, Cumbria.
Now, people these days visit theme parks to go on white-knuckle rides that definitely aren't for the faint-hearted. The very first ride for thrill-seekers was called the Moon Rocket, and it was built in 1939. Now its owners want to sell it, and the National Heritage Memorial Fund wants to raise thousands of pounds to stop the ride going abroad or being broken up. Duncan Kennedy has been to Yorkshire to see it.
History hidden in a warehouse. The one and only Shaw's Moon Rocket. First appearing in 1939, it reached speeds of 30 miles an hour. The jaw-dropping Moon Rocket reinvented the fairground ride.
This was a real change from the rides that had gone previously, much more sedate rides like galloping horses. This was a ride of real speed, the first white-knuckle ride that had been seen in the world.
For pre-war audiences, space capsules were the stuff of fiction. Thousands flocked to see it.
It really was magic for the first customers of the Moon Rocket in Liverpool in 1939. Back then, they paid threepence to go on a 3-minute ride. Now, it really is the only one of its kind anywhere in the world.
But over the years, taste changed and the Moon Rocket became too big to move. The owners want to sell it to the Fairground Heritage Centre here in Devon. But even with National Heritage Memorial Fund help, they're still short, which could mean
It will be lost. It will not be able to be ridden by new generations of people, and so they won't build up those memories like people who rode it from the 1930s through to the 60s and 70s have been able to do.
Now only school children come to witness its abandoned glory.
It's really fascinating, it looks beautiful. It's really, 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 really good.
5 really goods must mean it's, well, really good. The moon rocket, now in need of one small step to be saved. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News in Yorkshire.
Let's look at the weather now. Here's Stav Daneos. Stav.
Hi there. Thank you, Rita. Good afternoon to you. Well, I'll use Weather Watcher pictures to paint the story from this morning. Quite a contrast from east to west. You can see this picture here in Gwynedd in northwest Wales, showing the cloudy grey skies, outbreaks of rain. Compare that to the sunshine further east and in towards the southeast. Now, the sunshine, though, diminishing across southeast as the weather front responsible for the rain in the west continues to march its way eastwards this afternoon. Some heavy bursts across the East Midlands, but generally light and patchy in towards southeast England. But actually, conditions will improve across the west after that wet morning. Wales, the Midlands, southwest England, feeling quite warm and muggy in the sunshine, but that could spark off a few heavy, potentially thundery showers. Wet across northeast England, that weather front static across Northern Ireland, southern Scotland, with the rain easing, but remaining quite cloudy and dull. But the northern half of Scotland brighter with some sunshine and a few showers. Now, that weather front across Northern Ireland, Northern England and southern Scotland begins to migrate southwards overnight. So it looks like it'll be quite damp, quite close and wet across this central swathe of the UK. To the north of it, it'll be clearer, cooler and fresher, but to the south, it will still be quite warm and muggy. So for Friday then, it means that weather front continues to move southwards. So for England and Wales, a lot of cloud around, few showers, maybe a little bit of brightness, still feeling quite warm and muggy here. But to the north of it, conditions really brightening up with some cool and fresher air moving south, although with more sunshine, it'll actually be warmer tomorrow afternoon than what it was this afternoon across the north. Now, if you're heading to Cheshire for the Carfest North, well, conditions will improve on Friday as that weather front clears away. And then for the weekend, it's sunshine and 1 or 2 showers. And remember, evenings and nights will be chilly, so bear that in mind if you're under canvas. So for the weekend, then, that weather front eventually clears away from the south of the country, taking the humid air with it. So for Saturday and Sunday, we open the doors to a north or northwesterly wind. That'll allow slightly cooler and fresher air to move in across many areas. But by day, it's going to feel lovely. Lots of sunshine, feeling warm by day. The odd passing light shower around, particularly in the north and the west of the UK. And like I mentioned, evenings and nights will be rather chilly. So this is a more detailed picture for Saturday then. A cool, fresh start, lots of sunshine around, feeling quite warm by day, particularly across the south. To the north and the west, some showers developing, and they will also develop a bit further south as temperatures rise. And it's a similar picture on Sunday after quite a cool, fresh start. There'll be plenty of sunshine around, making it feel warm by day. But again, there is that chance of showers across the north and the west. So a pretty decent weekend coming up, but pretty usable weather. But remember, those nights will be cool and fresher than what we've been used to of late.
Thank you, Stav. Now, a reminder of our top story this lunchtime. Lloyds Bank is cutting another 3,000 jobs and closing 200 branches. It's partly blaming economic uncertainty following the EU referendum. Well, that's all from us. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.